Ever feel like you're leading a double life, like juggling different roles and passions? Maybe seeing the world in ways other people don't always get.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, our subject today makes that look easy. Imagine being like a super respected rabbi, a brilliant philosopher, sought after astronomer,
Right.
and the Sultan's personal physician, all at the same time. In 12th century Egypt, no less.
Talk about a busy schedule. But yeah, that's Maimonides. He was living proof you don't have to choose between faith and reason, or tradition and new ideas. He embraced it all.
He really did. And his big book, The Guide for the Perplexed, it's like a map of that crossroads where faith meets philosophy.
It's definitely a challenging read, but so worth it.
You've said you wanted to really dig into it, and I get it. It can be a little intimidating.
It's true. Not exactly beach reading. But listen, Maimonides, he wasn't writing for some exclusive club of scholars. He was writing for anyone who's ever looked up at the stars and felt that pull, the big questions about faith, the meaning of life, what it all means, that wrestling match between your head and your heart.
People who feel, well, perplexed.
Exactly. He gets that grappling with these ideas can be a real brain twister. And right off the bat, he tackles a big one. The idea that we, as humans, can ever truly understand God directly.
Wait, is he saying we shouldn't even try, give up on ever getting God?
He's not saying give up, but he's definitely realistic about our limits. He says our human minds, incredible as they are still, well, finite, limited.
Okay.
But God, infinite, limitless. Trying to grasp that with our human brains is like trying to pour the ocean into a teacup. It just doesn't compute.
So, what's the solution? If we can't just think our way to understanding God, how are we supposed to even begin to approach something that vast?
That's where things get really interesting. He says, instead of trying to define God directly, we need a different approach.
I'm listening.
We need similes, metaphors, stories. The same way we explain complicated things to kids, right? We use comparisons they understand. Maimonides says it's the same with us and God.
So those stories in Scripture, those parables, we shouldn't get hung up on every little detail.
Exactly. A perfect example is how he interprets, and God rested on the seventh day.
Right. I always pictured God needing a nap.
Me too.
Yeah.
But Maimonides says, hold on, let's think about rest differently. It's not that God was tired, physically exhausted.
Right. God doesn't need a power nap.
Exactly. It's about completion. Think of it as that feeling when you finish a huge project.
Finally.
Yes, not because you're tired, but because it's done. Perfect. That's the kind of rest Maimonides is talking about. It tells us God's creation wasn't some haphazard thing, It was deliberate, complete, whole.
I like that. It's like he's giving us permission to think outside the box when it comes to Scripture, not just taking everything literally, but looking for those deeper meanings.
Exactly. He's saying, here are some mental stepping stones to help you get closer to the divine. You might not reach the top, but each step gets you a little higher, a little closer to understanding.
So instead of getting lost in the weeds, arguing about literal interpretations, he's saying, look, here's a different way to connect with these ideas.
Yes. And he does this with so many concepts. It's about seeing the world and our place in it with fresh eyes.
And that includes prophecy. And trust me, folks, Maimonides had some pretty radical ideas about prophecy that we're going to dive into next. Okay, so prophecy. Most people, they think, crystal balls, fortune tellers.
Right.
Maybe even little danger money involved.
A little bit of risk, yeah.
But Maimonides, he throws that whole image out the window.
Oh, he totally flips the script. Forget about predicting the future, he says. Prophecy, it's about something way bigger. It's about how connected we are to something much greater than ourselves.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So how does he explain it?
Well, he talks about this thing called the active intellect. Think of it like this wellspring of universal wisdom. And he says we can all tap into it.
The active intellect.
Yeah. Imagine the most incredible library ever, right? Every truth, every bit of knowledge, all stored in this one place.
Okay.
That's the active intellect. A source of knowledge that's outside of us, but we can access it if we know how.
So when I have those aha moments, a sudden flash of insight.
Exactly.
That's me tapping into the active intellect.
You got it. And prophets, they're the masters of that connection.
They have the premium plan.
Totally. They're downloading wisdom from the active intellect at super speed. But, and here's where it gets interesting, Maimonides, he says there are levels to this.
Levels. Some prophets are getting a stronger signal than others.
Precisely. He puts Moses right at the top. Direct line to the source. No interference.
The ultimate download speed.
Exactly. That's how we receive the Ten Commandments, pure divine communication.
Wow. But what about other prophets? They all experience this connection differently, right?
Exactly. Maimonides says most prophets, they connect through dreams, visions, those altered states where the everyday world kind of fades away.
Hold on, are you saying my dreams actually mean something?
Well, he did believe that for people with strong spiritual connections, dreams could be a way to access those deeper truths, even while we sleep.
So while I'm snoozing, I could be downloading cosmic secrets. That's kind of wild.
It makes you think, doesn't it? What
Yeah.
kind of wisdom are we missing out on? But even if we're not all having prophetic dreams, Maimonides believed that we can all strive for that connection, that deeper understanding.
So less about predicting the future, more about fulfilling our potential.
Now you're getting it. And that actually leads perfectly into what Maimonides believed was the ultimate purpose of life.
All right, so the ultimate purpose of life. Hit me with it. What did Maimonides say we're all striving for?
Get ready for it, because it's not what you might expect. It's not about, money or possessions or even just being a good person.
Okay, now I'm really interested. Spill it. What's the secret to a life well-lived Maimonides style?
He says it's all about our intellect, developing it, pushing its limits, using it to get closer to understanding God. That's the goal. That's what makes us different from everything else in creation.
So not about what we have or even what we do, but what we understand. That's pretty radical when you think about it.
It really is. It's like he's saying our brains, they're our most valuable asset.
Invest in your mind.
Right. Not with money, obviously, but with knowledge,
Yeah.
with contemplation, with this constant drive to connect to something bigger than ourselves.
Makes sense. But I gotta ask, Maimonides wasn't all up in the clouds with this super heady philosophy, right? He gives some practical advice too.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
He gave very specific guidance on how to actually train your brain, so to speak.
Mm.
He talks about being mindful of what we consume, physically and mentally, being careful with our words, making time for quiet reflection, all that stuff that sounds so simple, but it actually takes real discipline.
It's like he's saying, look, you've got this amazing tool, your mind. Don't waste it on junk food, gossip. Feed it something good. Use it to create, connect, really grapple with life's big questions.
100%. And that actually brings us to another area where Maimonides really challenges us, how he interprets the commandments.
Right, the commandments. I mean, there are a lot of them, and some seem, well, let's just say, a little outdated.
That's exactly what Maimonides saw. People looking at all these rules, some of them pretty random seeming, wondering how they fit into a life of reason and intellect.
So what did he say? Did he just write them off as old-fashioned traditions?
Not at all.
Yeah.
He actually argues that even the commandments that seem arbitrary, they serve a deeper purpose. There's a hidden agenda.
Okay, I need you to unpack that for me. What kind of hidden agenda are we talking about here?
Well, remember, Maimonides was writing at a time when a lot of Jewish people were surrounded by idol worship, and all sorts of beliefs that contradicted their faith. So he saw the commandments as a kind of protection, a fence almost.
Like guardrails.
Yes, to keep people from straying too far from their core values and ultimately from God.
It's like, I don't know, one of those apps that blocks certain websites, not to restrict you, but to help you focus.
Yes. The commandments, even the ones that seem kind of strange on the surface, they're there for a reason. To shape our behavior, build good habits, ultimately lead us closer to God.
So it's like Maimonides is saying, okay, I know this seems weird, but trust me on this. Follow these rules and you'll be less likely to get distracted by things that will lead you astray.
It's about building that framework for spiritual growth, even if you don't always see the big picture at the time.
It takes a certain amount of trust, doesn't it, to follow those rules when you don't fully see the point.
And that leads to this really interesting question. If the commandments have this deeper hidden purpose, does that mean we can just ignore the literal meaning altogether?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I mean, on the one hand, you don't want to just blindly follow rules you don't understand, right? But then again, maybe there's some wisdom there, even if it's not immediately obvious.
Exactly. It's a balance. And Maimonides, he really wrestled with that tension. He says it's not about choosing reason over tradition. It's about finding a way to honor both. We have to engage with the text, ask those tough questions, and ultimately come to our own understanding.
It's like he's saying, don't just accept what you're told. Use your brain, use your heart, figure out what rings true for you, which is a message that's still so relevant today.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it all ties into one of Maimonides' most, mind-bending ideas, The idea of divine providence.
Okay, here's where we get into the really big questions, right? If God is in control, if he has a plan, does that mean everything that happens is part of it, even the bad stuff?
That is the million-dollar question. And Maimonides' answer is, well, it's both reassuring and kind of unsettling at the same time. He says God's plan, it is all-encompassing, yeah, but it operates on different levels.
So it's not like every little thing is micromanaged. There's some flexibility.
Exactly. He uses this example of a shipwreck. He says the storm, the waves crashing, the boat falling apart, all that maybe could be explained by natural causes, right?
Yeah.
The laws of physics and all that. But the fact that those specific people were on that specific ship at that specific moment.
That's divine providence.
Exactly.
So it's not that God's causing every wave to crash, but he's orchestrating the bigger picture, the circumstances that bring us all together, the good and the bad. It's a lot to take in.
It really is. And it's something Maimonides wants us to keep thinking about. He's saying, maybe there's a hidden purpose in everything, even the things we can't understand yet. And maybe, just maybe, that's okay.
It's kind of freeing when you think about it like that. It takes the pressure off needing to have all the answers, right?
Totally. It's about embracing the mystery. And on that note, I think we'll leave our listeners with a little bit of mystery of their own to ponder. If you're feeling a little perplexed after this deep dive, don't worry, that's a good thing. It means your brain is engaged. Just remember, the journey itself is just as important as the destination, and sometimes the most profound truths. We find them not in the answers, but in the asking.